My name is Evelyn Hart, and I'm 31 years old. 6 weeks ago, I thought I was going to marry a man who loved me for who I was, not for what I owned, not for what I could eventually give him, but for the quiet, steady life we said we were building together. I was wrong. At the time, though, I didn't know that yet. I was still in the phase where I believed trust was something you gave once and didn't have to defend afterward. The house mattered to me more than I ever admitted out loud. It was a modest 2-story place in a decent neighborhood. Nothing flashy, nothing that would impress strangers, but it was fully paid off and carried the kind of weight you don't see on paper. My grandmother raised me there after my parents died when I was 8. She taught me how to balance a checkbook, how to listen more than I spoke, and how to recognize the difference between kindness and compliance. When she passed 3 years ago, she left the house to me and a small trust to my younger brother, Lucas, who was finishing graduate school at the time. I never thought the house would become a battleground. Then I met Daniel. Daniel was confident in a way that made people lean in when he spoke. He worked in sales, always thinking 2 steps ahead, always talking about leverage, optics, strategy. He made me feel steady at first, like I didn't have to plan every single thing because he already had ideas ready. He moved in about 8 months after we started dating. He didn't pay rent, just utilities, groceries, the occasional dinner. I didn't mind. I told myself we were building a life, not splitting receipts. He changed the curtains, repainted the living room gray, said it increased the value. I let him. The first red flag came at brunch. We were sitting with his friends, people who spoke casually about marriages like they were mergers. Someone mentioned a woman who was losing everything in a divorce because nothing was in her name. "That's why you always protect yourself," one of them said. Daniel smiled. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I stayed quiet. I always did. And that was my mistake. I didn't confront Daniel after that brunch. I told myself it was nothing. Just talk. Just opinions floating around a table with too much coffee and not enough consequence. I'd spent years learning how to be reasonable, how not to overreact, how to give people the benefit of the doubt even when my instincts whispered otherwise. But instincts don't disappear just because you ignore them. They wait. 3 weeks later, they caught up to me. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd finished work early, rare for me, and decided to surprise Daniel by making dinner. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway, his car already there. I let myself in softly, keys still warm in my hand. I heard his voice before I saw him. He was in the kitchen, back turned, phone pressed to his ear. He was laughing. Not the polite laugh he used with clients, not the gentle one he used with me, but something sharper, familiar, confident. "No, I know exactly what I'm doing," he said. "The house alone is worth at least $340. I froze in the hallway. He kept talking. "Once we're married, I'll bring it up casually. She won't make a fuss. She never does." My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical. "She didn't even argue when I repainted," he continued, amused. "She's soft. That's why this works." I don't remember breathing. I remember staring at the corner of the wall where my grandmother used to hang a calendar every January, marking birthdays in red pen. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Too soft. That was the word he chose. I backed out quietly, stepped back onto the porch, and closed the door harder than necessary. Then I forced my voice into something normal. "Daniel, I'm home." He turned, smile ready, already in place. "Hey," he said. "You're early. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just finished up sooner than expected." He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, went back to scrolling on his phone like nothing had happened. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes, hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing. That night I didn't sleep. I replayed every moment of our relationship through a new lens. Every time I'd agreed instead of questioned. Every time I'd been accommodating. Every time I'd told myself that compromise was love. By morning, something inside me had gone very still. I called Lucas on my drive to work. "I need to tell you something," I said. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't soften his response. "He said that?" Lucas asked finally. "About you being soft?" Word for word. There was a pause. "You know what Grandma used to say," he said carefully. "Protect what's yours before someone else decides it belongs to them." I knew what he was suggesting before he finished. "You want me to transfer the house to you?" I said. "Temporarily," he replied. "Just until you're sure. Legally, cleanly. If nothing happens, we transfer it back. If something does, he can't touch it." I hesitated, not because I didn't trust Lucas, but because doing this meant admitting the truth. That the man I loved was already planning around me instead of with me. I'll think about it, I said. I didn't tell Daniel anything. I didn't ask questions. I didn't pull away. Instead, I researched, quietly, methodically. I learned how deed transfers worked, what counted as a gift, how long the process took, what protections existed for unmarried partners. I spoke to a real estate attorney and explained just enough to get clear answers. 2 weeks. That's all it took. On a Thursday, I signed the paperwork. By the following Friday, the house was legally in Lucas's name. I still lived there, still paid every bill, still slept in the same bed next to a man who thought he was 3 steps ahead of me. He had no idea, and I let him keep believing that. The weeks after the transfer were illuminating. Once you stop seeing someone as who you hope they are and start seeing them as who they've been showing you all along, patterns sharpen. Conversations change texture. Little comments stand out like fingerprints under blacklight. Daniel talked about the house constantly. Not directly, never outright, but always circling it. He mentioned renovations like they were inevitable, suggested refinancing to free up capital, talked about long-term investments, and how we could leverage equity better if we were strategic. I nodded, smiled, played the part. If he thought I was soft, I let him keep that belief. It made him careless. 3 weeks after the deed transfer finalized, he told me he wanted to have dinner at home on Friday. Something special. He used that word the way people do when they're about to ask for something they've rehearsed. I knew what was coming. He cooked, opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving, lit candles. It was almost funny how much effort he put into setting the stage, convinced the ending was already written. We ate, small talk, future plans, vacations we'd never take. Then he leaned back in his chair and sighed, like someone about to deliver wisdom. I've been thinking a lot about our future, he said. Yeah, I replied, swirling my wine. About marriage, about making sure we're both protected. There it was. He framed it gently, practically, like a favor he was doing for us. I think before we get married, it makes sense to put the house in both our names, he continued. Just to make things official, equal partners. I watched his face as he spoke, how confident he looked, how sure. Equal partners, I repeated. Exactly. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It's not that I don't trust you, it's just smart planning. My mom even said, Your mom, I said softly. She's been through a divorce. She knows how messy things get. I pulled my hand back, stood up, and walked toward the living room. What are you doing? He asked, confused. I grabbed my briefcase from where I'd left it earlier, took out a folder, and returned to the table. I slid it toward him carefully, deliberately, like placing a glass object that could shatter if handled wrong. What's this? He asked, smiling. He looked pleased, expectant. Open it. He did. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It faltered first, then stiffened, then vanished completely as his eyes scanned the page, then the next. What is this? He asked. The deed, I said. The new one. He looked up sharply. You transferred the house? Yes. To who? To my brother. The color drained from his face. That's not funny, he said. You can't just, why would you do that? I met his eyes calmly. Because I heard you on the phone, talking about how I'm too soft to say no, about how you'd bring this up after we were married because you assumed I wouldn't fight you. Silence fell between us, like something heavy hitting the floor. You took that out of context, he said finally, laughing nervously. I didn't mean it like that. You meant it exactly like that. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. So you went behind my back? He snapped. You made a legal move without even talking to me? It was never your house, I said evenly. It was mine, and now it's protected. You're paranoid, he said. This is insane. Maybe, I replied, but I'm not naive. He grabbed his jacket. I'm going to my mom's, he said. We'll talk when you've calmed down. Don't bother coming back, I said. He froze at the door. Excuse me? You heard me. Pack your things this weekend. This is my home too. No, I said quietly. It never was. He slammed the door so hard the picture frame in the hallway rattled. I sat alone at the table, candle flames flickering, wine untouched. For the first time in weeks, my chest felt steady. Daniel didn't come back that night, or the next. The house felt strange without him. Too quiet in some places, too loud in others. The gray walls in the living room seemed colder than they ever had before, like they were holding on to something that didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't rush to change anything. I knew better. On Sunday afternoon, I was in the garage organizing tools, things my grandmother had taught me to keep in order, when the side door opened without warning. Evelyn, we need to talk. Daniel's mother stood there, already halfway inside, like she owned the space. Daniel was behind her. And next to him, a woman I recognized immediately, one of his friends, brought along not for support, but for witnesses. I set the toolbox down slowly. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "You can't just throw my son out of his home," his mother snapped. "He's lived here for almost 2 years." "He was a guest," I replied calmly, "and he's no longer welcome." She stepped closer, her voice tightening. "He has rights." "No," I said, "he doesn't." Daniel finally spoke. "You didn't even give me time to explain." "I gave you time," I said. "You used it to plan." His mother scoffed. "We've contacted a lawyer." I leaned against the workbench, surprisingly at ease. "Good. They'll tell you the same thing I am." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the property isn't in my name," I said. "It's in my brother's, legally. Your lawyer will figure that out soon enough." The room went still. His mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Smart women protect themselves." "So do smart men," I replied, "and smart women who've been underestimated." They left shortly after. No dramatic exit this time, just tension thick enough to taste. The letter came 3 days later. A demand for compensation, for improvements, for unjust enrichment, for emotional distress, dressed up in legal language, $45,000. I forwarded it to my attorney. She called me an hour later, laughing. "They don't have a case," she said. "He was a guest. Any changes were voluntary, and you don't even own the house anymore." "Should I respond?" I asked. "I will," she said, firmly. Daniel didn't stop there. He took it online. Posts about betrayal, about controlling partners, about being emotionally displaced. The comments filled with sympathy, people who didn't know me congratulating him on his escape. I didn't respond. Instead, I bought paint. The same warm beige my grandmother had chosen years ago. I spent an entire weekend repainting the living room, the smell of fresh paint filling the space, covering over gray intentions that had never been mine. When I finished, I stood back and looked around. It felt like breathing again. Daniel came back on Monday morning with a moving truck. I stayed in the bedroom while he and 2 friends cleared his things out. 3 hours. That's all it took to dismantle what I'd thought was a future. When they were done, he knocked softly on the door. "Can I come in?" I opened it. He looked smaller somehow, tired. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "My mom, she pushed a lot of this. I was just trying to protect myself." "That's the problem," I said. "You never trusted me. You managed me." He swallowed. "We could fix this. Therapy. Time." "I don't want to fix it," I said. "I want you to leave." He stood there for a moment, like he was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. The door closed behind him. The truck pulled away. And the house was mine again. The quiet that followed wasn't dramatic. No sobbing on the floor, no late-night breakdowns, no urge to call him just to hear a familiar voice. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has been lifted, when the body doesn't know what to do yet because it's been bracing for so long. For the first few days, I noticed how much space there actually was in the house. Not just physically, but emotionally. No tension humming beneath conversations, no second-guessing my words, no feeling like I was being slowly negotiated out of my own life. Lucas called me every morning that week. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm okay," I said, and this time it wasn't a lie. Daniel's social media campaign fizzled out faster than I expected. After my lawyer's response, polite, precise, and unmistakably final, his post shifted from accusation to vague sadness, then to silence. A week later, I repainted the bedroom, not because it reminded me of him, but because it reminded me of the version of myself who had let too much slide. I donated the furniture he'd helped choose, bought simpler pieces from thrift stores, ones that didn't try to impress anyone. The house started to feel like mine again, or maybe it just stopped feeling like his. About a month later, I ran into one of his friends at the grocery store. She hesitated before approaching me, like she wasn't sure what version of me she was about to meet. "I think you were right," she said quietly, "about protecting yourself." I nodded, didn't argue, didn't gloat. Vindication doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it just feels like confirmation. Lucas and I talked about the house over coffee not long after. "Do you want me to transfer it back?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "I might sell it eventually." "Anywhere in mind?" "Somewhere near the coast," I said. "Somewhere that doesn't hold conversations in the walls." He smiled. "Grandma would have liked that." I heard through mutual acquaintances that Daniel was already dating someone new. 3 months in, apparently serious. The information landed without impact. Not relief, not anger. Just distance. I unfollowed him. Didn't block him. Just let him drift out of my daily awareness the way people do when their chapter ends quietly instead of explosively. 5 months later, the house is still in Lucas's name. I'm still here, but I'm looking elsewhere. Different cities, different rhythms. I'm not dating. Not because I'm bitter, but because I'm paying attention now. To tone, to timing, to how people talk about ours when they haven't earned it yet. Transferring the deed was the smartest thing I've done in years. Not because it protected the house, but because it forced me to see the truth before it cost me more than property. I learned something important. Being kind doesn't mean being naive. Being calm doesn't mean being weak. And love that needs leverage isn't love, it's a transaction. The house is still standing. So am I. That's enough.